Hello, and a very warm welcome to the STUDIOCANAL Presents podcast. My name is Simon Brew from Film Stories magazine, and this is a regular podcast celebrating one of the biggest and deepest film libraries in the world. STUDIOCANAL's extensive library of over 6,000 films brings together cinema from around the globe. Ready for the winter nights are British horrors such as St Maud and Eden Lake. There's astonishing dramas such as Room and The Elephant Man, and some cinematic classics like The Graduate and The Third Man. This episode, we're going to switch our attention to 1964's Oscar-nominated One Potato, Two Potato, which is available on Blu-ray for the first time this autumn. To discuss the film, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr Clive Nwonka, the Associate Professor of Film, Culture and Society at University College London. Before we get into the conversation with him, here's a taste of the film.
You know what's between us? Hate, riots, lynchings, prejudice. I'm black, you're white. Come on.
How do you know it won't work, Frank? How do you know? Somebody's got to take a chance. Somebody's got to find out what will work and what won't.
A very warm welcome to you, Dr Nwonka, to the STUDIOCANAL Presents podcast. How do we find you? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. And thanks for the invitation, Simon. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. I finished lecturing today on cinema, so the vocabulary is very much within the scope of our conversation, you know.
I'm trusting that you're going to raise the intelligence level of this conversation straight away then. One thing we like to do with our guests before we get going is just get a little film fact about them. Maybe the first film you saw. What was it that got you into cinema in the first place?
Oh, wow. I mean, what got me into cinema as an academic and a cinephile would require a longer kind of podcast than we kind of have. But the first film I remember watching was The Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Which is interesting because I'm actually not a Star Wars fan. And I think it's the only Star Wars film I've actually watched in its entirety, which will sound maybe sacrilegious for a film scholar, but I bypassed that whole franchise and went straight to Rocky. So that tells you a little bit about my childhood and my kind of tastes and predilections there. So, you know.
So you started with The Empire Strikes Back. You ended up at Rocky.
Yeah.
Okay. Rocky 4 remains the finest Rocky film. I'll have that fight. So if we can turn our attention then to One Potato, Two Potato, which wasn't a film ahead of this episode I was particularly familiar with.
Well, it's a film set in Ohio in the 1960s in America, and tells the story of a white divorcee woman who is raising her child by herself and falls in love with a black man in her workplace who eventually moves in with him and his family. And the story tells about the difficulties that they experience, you know, being a multiracial family in the context of America, and climaxes, I think, quite a dramatic ending when the family is splintered by, you know, the court and racial prejudice. So it's very much a kind of film that was seen to be distinct and almost pioneering in its approach to thinking about racialization at the time.
History never rewards the films that go first. I think across, in fact, it's not just unique to film, is it? But we were, 2-3 years ahead of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was a far higher profile production, having not dissimilar conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, you know, watching One Potato from the vantage point of the present, it's a really, really impactful film emotionally.
Yeah.
Because you're taking back into the kind of 60s, but everything we now know about race and racism and interraciality and multiraciality and the way the film is constructed and its kind of ending, it's a really, really heavy film in terms of kind of emotional weight, in ways that maybe some of the other films that come subsequently that deal with the kind of interracial question maybe don't carry the same kind of punch. So I think you're correct that it may be something the burden of being the first one. And there are some exceptions in the history of cinema where other films that deal with that kind of thematic have tried to approach things in slightly different ways. But I do think it maybe was ahead of its time, maybe a couple of years too ahead of its time, because of course, Guess Who's Come to Dinner arise with the kind of Great Seeding Poeta, the central character, And maybe having him as a kind of icon maybe took attention away from maybe the other kinds of films that were kind of exploring the similar themes at the same time.
So who did we get in One Potato, Two Potato? We didn't get Sidney Poitier, but we got quite the cast list.
We did. I mean, we had Barbara Barry and Bernie Hamilton, and of course Richard Mulligan, Harry Belafonte. So, Robert L. Jones, who's a kind of a pioneer of cinema per se. So we were given some very, very big heavyweights. But I think once you combine the cast with the actual thematic and the time of its making as well, it's quite easy to see how Dinner, as I call it colloquially, would maybe supersede One Potato in some ways.
One of the things that really struck me about One Potato, Two Potatoes, it lures you in with a very conventional framework, that it opens with a court case. And I'm thinking at that point, I'm going to get the whole thing in flashback, but in a very kind of bite-sized way. But as you've just pointed out there, I mean, by the end, it's really, really heavy stuff. I don't know much of the history of this film. Was it something quite deliberate, really, that it was going for such an accessible opening 20 minutes or so, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't want to kind of speculate what the director's kind of thinking was, but I think as a kind of narrative approach, it's a very, very condensed narrative and makes it very, very kind of heightened in the sense of our kind of engagement with its kind of its parts, its dialogue, its kind of scenes, its fragments. So again, watching it from the vantage point of today, having obviously consumed thousands and thousands of films in my kind of time as a scholar, as a cinephile, but also that thematic as well, it's really, really kind of hard to decouple form from content. I think the form the film is told in really complements the actual themes it deals with in such a condensed way, but there's this amazing space where you can absorb and really kind of feel the racial prejudice and tensions and injuries that the central characters are experiencing due to their kind of engagements, their kind of love, their offspring and beyond as well.
You're running around with a white woman. I ask you something. You going to answer me? Answer me, you hear?
Yeah, that's true. But I don't see what difference it makes. Pop, we're in love, and just like you and Mom, we're in love and we want to get married.
You said there as well, not to second guess the director's approach to it. I mean, can you introduce the director to us? Because this was a directorial debut as well.
Absolutely was by Larry Pearce. And I didn't know too much about the director at the time when I kind of first watched it, because he isn't often kind of cited in the pantheons of kind of Hollywood kind of directors. But I think there is always something about the nature of a director's first-time film that tells you about their sensibilities, what their intentions are, what their predictions are, thematically, aesthetically, and beyond. And so for him to make that kind of debut, approaching what was a taboo subject, in the American kind of body social, yet alone kind of cinema, I think says quite a lot about the bravery he had to approach a subject, as a white director as well, that maybe other directors would have been a bit more reticent to kind of go towards.
There's a moment towards the end of the film as well, and you talked about the splintering towards the end of it, when a verdict's delivered in a courtroom, and the way it's directed is just astonishing. It's just like the fact that only one character moves. Everyone else is completely still, and the cuts keep going to angled reaction shots, really. I mean, can you talk to that approach a little bit and why you feel the film's so impactful?
I mean, I think also myself talking as a Black person, my receptors to the meanings of the form within which that scene is kind of framed will of course be kind of very, very kind of particular to myself. But there was just something about the way that the court judgment is delivered. And obviously, apologies if those who don't watch the film yet, I'm giving away kind of some detail here. But the way the judgment is delivered, which seems so surprising in the flow of the dialogue and the way we expect the film to conclude. So that kind of focused static camera where we see one person's sensibility and reaction and emotion, it really kind of engages the imagination. We're kind of imagining the reactions and the emotions of those outside the frame as well, which in many ways is quite central to experiences of racism. You're always kind of thinking about other people's reactions, other people's kind of thinking, what their positions are. And often those voices are unseen. And the film tends to try, I think, to mirror an experience of kind of racism in a more capacious way. I think the way the scene is delivered with that kind of verdict that comes so strikingly unexpected in many ways, I think, given the tone of the film as well, it really becomes quite a poignant scene.
The whole build-up to the verdict, I was convinced it was going to go the other way. I had no idea going into it what I was going to get. I got a visceral shock from just the matter-of-factness of the way that it was put across. What kind of response and reaction was the film getting when it came out? Have you got any flavour of that?
Well, it's difficult. I've not kind of captured too much about the kind of response, but from what I have kind of seen, of course, there was a certain kind of liberal applause for the bravery of exploring something so taboo as the interracial kind of marriage, again, in the American society. I think it's really kind of worth kind of mentioning that, both One Potato, Two Potato, but also Guess Who's Coming to Dinner were released, a few months after the landmark legal case in the USA, Loving versus Virginia, which of course overturned the ban on interracial marriage. And also it came before the assassination of Martin Luther King. So both films, I think, serve as a quite important cinematic time capsule. So I think about the impact of the film in a more kind of capacious way, thinking about a body of films that were trying to grapple with the kind of new nature of civil rights in America.
Yeah, and you said there that it was kind of liberal applause that the film had got. Was that an element of talking to people who were receptive to what it was talking about and aiming at them as opposed to going a little bit broad?
Well, I think it's very, very kind of hard. Again, I'm speculating here to think about that kind of film being a didactic pedagogical tool to kind of like redirect kind of racist minds to much more kind of utopian kind of liberal kind of worldview or experience. I think the very nature of cinema as a medium, of course, can be political and has been political and remains so, but that's a question of kind of form and approach and content. And I think, of course, the film would have appealed to those within the American body social who, of course, are liberal and want change and who are in and around that momentum of the civil rights. I'm not quite convinced that the film would have done the kind of pedagogical work of kind of reversing racist minds. Interestingly enough, I think maybe Guess Who's Come to Dinner would have been more successful at doing that because of the nature of the characterization. We have, of course, Sidney Poitier's character who represented this kind of Black excellence. He was so inconceivable as a Black person vis-a-vis the kind of image of a Black person in America at the time. He was a world-famous doctor and he was elegant and well-spoken and good-looking and, almost kind of too perfect in many ways. I think that certainly would have done some work in reimagining the Black male as a figure within America. That could have done some of the kind of work that maybe One Potato, Two Potato and other films as well were trying to do, but maybe the generic approach didn't allow for that. Dinner is a comedy. I think the comedic aspects of that maybe sometimes try to dilute the more serious nature of racism and interraciality that may would have been a bit more confronting to racism, or even those who are slightly kind of on the fence at the time.
I mean, comedy's always been a Trojan horse, hasn't it, as well? Just like a kind of a way to sneak stuff through in front of people. And One Potato, Two Potato is not a comedic film to me at all.
No, it's very, very kind of clear and direct in its intentions as well. I think the emotive kind of power of that, again, I'm speculating, maybe could have kind of pulled at the heartstrings of kind of those who are kind of still kind of grappling with kind of questions of race and racism, but definitely would have appealed to those who are ready.
I mean, also, one of the things that struck me about it is that the characters in the film are very much three-dimensional, raw and flawed in lots of their own ways. This isn't a kind of two-dimensional cookie-cutter film that's putting together. Every character has to sort of go through something a bit.
One of the things that I find interesting about the film, again, watching it in the present day, is the perspective of Frank's parents. So William and Martha, who of course are opposed to their relationship for obvious reasons. And they go through their own kind of journey to try and reconcile themselves with their own kind of prejudices. And it's interesting because often in the films of that time, and I'm also including British films at the time as well, the race problem was always a problem for white society. It was never always conceived in equal measure as a problem for kind of the Black population as well, at least within the family unit, for the obvious reasons we can imagine. So their reticence towards Julie initially, that's then remedied by her moving in with them and being amongst them, is an attempt to try and humanize the dehumanizing imagery of Black people within 1960s America. But I think also the birth of their child, their son, as a kind of conduit from which William, Frank's father, now recognizes the kind of joy and love that they both have for each other and what they've created. I think it was also a way to try and kind of disperse out to the kind of American public. This is what happens when you let love across the racial kind of binds exist. So I think you're completely right that all the characters have flaws and nuances that are kind of teased out and ironed out through the film. But thinking about the Black characters and their arc, which has always been something that's been absent or missing when we think around, the history of cinema and Black characterization.
I mean, we're looking back at the film now, 60 years on. I guess the only thing that really dates it as a 1960s film to me is the music, that the music blares out really quite loud against the drama of the film, really. But in terms of everything else, you talked about looking back at it now. How do you feel looking at that movie in a 2025 lens?
I mean, I'm probably one of the worst people to ask a question to, because I'm thinking now with my academic hat on, and I've taught this subject in context of cinema, but also society in my university career. And, you think about the other films that have tried to grapple with this kind of question. I mean, we talk about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and Two Plate, because they're notable films that have actually been nominated for Oscars and we recognize them. But, there was also Borderline in 1930 that, of course, starred Paul Robeson, which was actually one of the kind of first real kind of images of an interracial relationship, within kind of the British cinema, at least anyway. Of course, there were things that took place in the 60s in the UK, such as, the L-shaped room had a kind of background towards this as well. Flame in the Streets was much more of a kind of equal or facsimile to Guess Who's Come to Dinner, and of course, One Potato, Two Potato, that really kind of dealt with the interracial relationship head on in 60s Britain as a problem. And so all those social problem films, quote unquote, that I've had to consume and research, were all doing a similar thing from a different perspective. A Taste of Honey, of course, is another one. So I think looking back at it now, the one thing I do take is form. So it's a black and white film.
Yeah.
The transition from black and white to Technicolor and Eastman color, I think in the kind of 60s, really kind of heightens the contrast of racial difference that becomes quite emotive. So when I watch One Potato, Two Potato, then watch Flame in the Streets, or when I watch Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, you can see the almost oversaturation of the colors of our characters, our black characters, our white characters, the blonde hair we see in Kathy in Flame in the Streets. That's when you see the contrast pictorially. And then it gets us really kind of thinking about racial difference and what things were like for people. So looking back now, I think formally that's what kind of really kind of strikes me, is the kind of difference by looking at things in black and white vis-a-vis look at things in color.
I think you're one of the best people I could have asked that question to, not the worst. With my loyal STUDIOCANAL hat on, I'm just briefly pull another film into the conversation that was dealing with an interracial relationship as well. Pool of London as well has been on my list for a while. Can you just briefly just talk to us a little bit about that and where that fits in?
Yeah, Pool of London's a really interesting film because, again, it's one of the kind of, I think probably one of the kind of first real distinctive interracial story films that we have in the UK, in the sense that it was trying to offer a realistic portrayal of post-war London, migration, with our central character, Johnny, who was a Jamaican sailor, but also the, I think, groundbreaking depiction of an interracial relationship in British cinema. And of course, there are things about the film that speak to all we've mentioned so far, racisms towards the interracial kind of couples against the backdrop of, crime and, organized kind of activity along the docks of London. But also the way the film focuses towards the end at the sensibilities and experiences of the lead character, Johnny, which wasn't always obvious in the opening scenes of the film, where we focus much more on the character Dan MacDonald. So there's something about using the story arc to pivot back to what things were like for Black people coming into kind of London, even on a temporal basis as a sailor. And those experiences of kind of racial difference, racism, rejection, and beyond. So it's a great, great film. But I think it's also a film that I think is worthy of a bit more attention, because if we think about 60s cinema, often we tend to couple those films as kind of the angry young men films, of Richardson and, all the kind of great ones, Saturday Night, Sunday Morning and This Sporting Life, Look Back in Anger. What's interesting to me is, and I've always argued, that these earlier films, the kind of social problem films of, Pool of London, Flame in the Streets, even things going back, such as Wind of Change, for instance. These are films that were grappling with the social issue, quote unquote, of interraciality in a way that was, I think, much more political and social than maybe the other films that are being kind of revered of the kind of angry young men, because they were coming from novels and, you know, working class writers who are pairing up with kind of directors from Oxbridge. So there
Yeah.
always seems to be this kind of elevation of those films, a kind of denigration of a kind of Flame in the Streets or a Pool of London or Wind of Change or beyond. But I think those films are really trying to kind of get to the marrow of social change within the UK, mostly kind of London, that I think are worthy of much more kind of serious revisitation.
And do you think there's a reason that maybe Pool of London and One Potato, Two Potato dropped out of public consciousness a bit? I mean, you said specific to Pool of London, it's one that not many people are aware of, that you think more people should see. Is there something specific about these two films?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think, again, One Potato, Two Potato got superseded quite quickly by Guess Who's Come to Dinner, for generic reasons, for reasons of stardom, for reasons of timing, I think, as well. And I think it might be the case that Pool of London was a film that maybe got superseded by Flame in the Streets, maybe, because they were trying to kind of do similar things at the same time. And there may be other kind of film scholars who will disagree with me on this, but I always thought that Pool was a bit more of a kind of, you know, vignette of a bigger story to come, that then became a Flame in the Street.
And also, if One Potato, Two Potato had a directorial debut, I do just want to name check the acting debut we get in Pool of London, that Earl Cameron, a brilliant storied actor. Can you just introduce him just for us, for those, I mean, I can't imagine people aren't aware, but just in case.
He is, was a titan of British cinema, and that's, I don't know how else I can kind of describe him. I mean, as a Black film scholar coming through, you look towards the history, representation, and in all my kind of earliest kind of forages into kind of the history kind of cinema kind of Britain, you find the name Earl Cameron. He had such an amazing screen presence. We think about all those kind of key films there. Yes, of course, you mentioned kind of Pool of London, but he also starred in Flame in the Streets and played the character Gomez to great distinction. You know, he played in the detective in Sapphire to great distinction as well. So he was a complete titan of, you know, Black representation in those kind of mid-60s films, and had a career that kind of went well on into the kind of 2000s as well. So he's sorely missed, I think, in British cinema.
You know, when you're at the wheel of a ship at night, far out at sea and nothing else to do, you think about a lot of things you don't understand. You wonder why one man's born white and another isn't. And how about God himself? What color's he? And the stars seem so close, and the world so small in comparison with all the other worlds above you. It doesn't seem to matter so much how we were born.
It doesn't matter.
It does, you know. Maybe one day it won't anymore, but it still does.
Rounding these films off, apart from the fact I'm a man of a certain age, and both of them appeal enormously for being under 90 minutes. I always appreciate an under 90-minute film these days. But is there anything else we should look out for with these two films? I mean, hopefully we've convinced a few people to give them a go, but is there anything we're not touched on?
Not so much things that we've not touched upon, but I think maybe a preface to those who are, I mean, interested in kind of watching these films, but also the other films you mentioned as well that deal with the kind of interracial relationship story or subplot, or however one wants to define these things, is I think it's really important not to try to use those films to try and make sense of the present. I think there's always a kind of danger that we only kind of value films that deal with questions of race, about how they kind of speak to the kind of present, particularly historical kind of films. And I think that's can be useful, but it isn't the primary purpose of looking back and appreciating cinema history. I think appreciating what the film was trying to kind of do in its own context.
Yeah.
There may be things you watch in a film that you think, you know, are not particularly accurate or representative, or maybe things you disavow based on looking from the kind of vantage point of kind of 2025. I don't think that cinema is the kind of medium for that necessarily. It's not a documentary per se. So I think it's really important that when we're watching kind of One Potato, Two Potato, try our best to kind of really kind of situate the film within 1960s America in the same way we do go with A Guest Who's Come to Dinner, or A Flame in the Streets, or A Pool of London. These are the way that things were at the kind of time. Here's how people were thinking at the time. Here's how, the cinema industries plurally were working at the time as well. And that should always kind of be framed in that context, I think.
One Potato, Two Potato is available on a brand new DVD and Blu-ray set, and Pool of London is available on the Studio Canal Presents channel on Apple TV Plus and Prime Video. Dr. Nwonka, this has been a fascinating conversation, but before I let you go, with each of our guests, we like to just get them to dig a bit deeper into the Studio Canal catalogue and pull out a double bill for us, and I think you've got one for us.
Yes, I do. So it was a very, very hard task because it's an amazing catalogue, so I really appreciate them asking me. But again, asking a film scholar and to pick out 2 films for your immense catalogue is no easy task. So I wish I had more numbers to work with. But firstly, I'm going to pick the film The Prophet by Jacques Audiard, who I think is a fantastic filmmaker, and it's one of his best films from 2009. And then second of all, and this was a really, really kind of hard choice, I was thinking about what would work as a kind of a companion for The Prophet, given what The Prophet is doing. But I decided to do a documentary, and the documentary is the film Amazing Grace from 2018, of course, with the fantastic Aretha Franklin.
We've not had Amazing Grace chosen before. Why did you pick that one particularly? It's a great documentary.
I mean, I just think it's a fantastic documentary. I think it captures an icon of the 20th century in full flight. And just watching the performances, how they capture the proximity you get, but the way that the film is kind of capturing all these things as well. I just think it's a masterpiece.
Dr. Clive Nwonka, The Empire Strikes Back's loss has been very much our gain today. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and thank you for joining us on the Studio Canal Presents podcast.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
One Potato, Two Potato is now available on DVD and Blu-ray in the UK. You can find both A Prophet and Amazing Grace on the Studio Canal Presents channel on Apple TV Plus and Prime Video. We just got time to tell you a bit of home entertainment news from the world of Studio Canal. The acclaimed The Life of Chuck, directed by Mike Flanagan and based on the novella by Stephen King, is now available to rent and buy digitally across all major platforms. Furthermore, the film, starring previous podcast guests Tom Hiddleston and Chiwetel Ejiofor, is heading to DVD, Blu-ray and 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray on the 10th of November. On the 24th of November, the Tom Hardy headlined Legend is arriving on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray for the first time. Hardy plays the roles of both Ronnie and Reggie Kray in this true-life crime thriller that tells the story of the Kray twins. The new disc release is to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the film, and the package includes special extras and a 48-page perfect band book, including an essay from director Brian Helgeland. There are also excerpts from the original production notes for the film, 2 posters and 4 art cards as well. And finally for now, on the 24th of November, also comes the Agatha Christie collection on Blu-ray and 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. 4 films are included here. Sidney Lumet's take on Murder on the Orient Express, starring Albert Finney, is first up. Then Peter Ustinov steps into the role of Hercule Poirot for both Death on the Nile and Evil Under the Sun. And then finally, the late great Angela Lansbury takes the lead as Miss Marple in The Mirror Cracked. All 4 films are available separately, but they're also part of a very special box set that includes a 64-page booklet and 4 posters of brand new artwork. It's available to order now. I'll be back soon with the next episode of Studio Canal Presents. Until the next time, to get all the news on Studio Canal films as it happens, and to find out more about the Apple TV and Prime Video channels, you can visit www.studiocanal.co.uk or follow Studio Canal at Studio Canal UK on X, Instagram and TikTok. Ta-ta for now.